Hello and welcome everybody to the Reckoning Live Book Tour. Day 5, I believe. It is day 5. If you guys don't already know, my name is Kayla Canoe. I am an author, YouTuber, gamer, and aerialist. And my debut novel, The Reckoning, is an adult dark fantasy novel, and it is releasing in 3 days. 3 days, guys. And so today I'm going to be reading chapter 3. Now, I have had previous book tour events. All of them are linked below. There's a playlist dedicated to the entire live virtual tour. So if you didn't hear chapters 1 and 2, you can go back and watch them and then come back here. This will be up for replay after I am done. So if you missed it, you can check out my previous ones. You can check out the times for my future ones, which are basically going to be every day this week because it is release week and it is release week. So yeah, I'm going to be reading chapter 3. I got my book here. Let me grab it. Oh, it's so beautiful. I'll show it off. Here it is. If you guys haven't seen it like a million times already. My book. I did just throw the content warnings up in the chat. I will pin that message so that everyone see that. But I will go through them again before I start reading because everything's linked to your ebook copy. You can pre-order that. It is linked below. Physical copies you'll be available to purchase on the 14th, which is when the book releases. I have paperback from Amazon and there will be hardbacks. I don't have one with me yet, but there will be hardbacks on the 14th as well, coming from Ingram Sparks. So if you prefer physical copies, they're being made. They are being made. You can also vote for The Reckoning if you want to help support me. Down below, I'm in a competition, and that goes through like November. So it takes a couple seconds for you to go over there and vote. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my newsletter. I only send out newsletters about once a month, and then I think only like if I have like a super special announcement. So far I've only done a newsletter once a month, and then I'm probably going to do a release newsletter as well. But if you guys want to stay in the know on when the rest of these books are coming out, subscribe to the newsletter. You'll be the first to know. You'll be the first to have all the announcements, and you won't have to worry about missing when they get released because, you know, social media does not actually show you everything that you want to see, and you might miss it if you're not on the newsletter. All right, that being said, it is time for the content warnings. This is an adult novel. It's a dark fantasy novel, which means it has dark themes. It is intended for people 18 or older. So if you don't fit that category, maybe don't watch this or listen with your ears because, yeah, it's going to get graphic. All right. Some of the content warnings include beatings, blood and gore, death, loss of a loved one, murder, physical violence, psychological abuse, rape with explicit description, sex, sexual violence, trauma, and victim blaming. So there you have it. Those are the content warnings. They are in the chat again. So, yep, if anyone jumps in and they don't know what we're doing, we're reading chapter 3 today, guys. It's from Tyler's perspective. I'm super excited. And yeah, and if you guys have any questions or any, like, you know, questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and I will answer them when I am done reading. But we are just going to go ahead, get into it. I'll show you because I just love showing these things off. Here's the book. Here's Tyler's chapter title and my religion symbol because it's beautiful. Chapter 3, Tyler. My eyes stung fiercely as the dust clouds settled around me. The ache in my head was a reminder of what had happened. I'd let my guard down, and my father had landed a hit across my temple. We'd worked on my self-defense skills all summer, but I still had a ways to go. "Get up," my father shouted at me on a repetitive loop until I staggered to my feet. I raised my sword and tried to regain my focus. His hit came hard as his blade crashed into mine. The power behind it made me stumble back. I landed in the dry dirt again, and another cloud of dust puffed up from the ground. This time I used it as cover to launch a counterattack. It barely fazed him. I swung my sword with all my strength, but he was fast enough to block it. Our swords crashed together again. "Tyler," the disappointment in his voice was clear, "you must use your opponent's strength and size against them. You'll never beat out an attacker with a frontal assault." He was right. Even though I trained with him every morning, my strength would never be greater than that of a man. I hoped I would never have to fight. I had faith in love. I had faith that love and kindness could turn around even the most dire situation. The late fall sunrise washed the land with light. It glinted off our swords as we continued to duel. I was determined to be as great a warrior as my father, but his magical abilities always put me at a disadvantage. He had had a connection to the earth. The lands of Altera were both his ally and his weapon. Dust lifted from the ground, clouding the air. It swirled around me like a storm. I couldn't see more than a foot in front of me, but I knew my father was coming. The dust storm was merely a distraction. If only I had magic of my own to make the fight more fair, then I could be as strong as he was. I ducked when the glint of a sword hilt cut through the dust. It just barely missed my temple. My foot caught on a dip in the ground, or rather, the ground dipped out from under me. I fell to the earth, rolling over to meet my father's sword with my own. "Good," my father said, as the dust fell from the air. I saw the smile on his face. The lines on his forehead almost completely disappeared when he smiled. I wished I had a smile like his, that I had any resemblance to him, but I didn't. He was an Asud, and I was human. A figure in the distance brought our duel to a halt. My mother walked toward us with a somber expression on her face. Her dark brown hair was tied on top of her head in a frazzled mess, and her olive skin was still darkened from the summer sun. I didn't look anything like her either. It was obvious that I'd been adopted by them as a baby, though they'd never told me so themselves. I had bright blue eyes and long blonde hair that nearly blended in with my pale skin. Even when I'd spend time in the sun during the summer to look more like my parents, I'd only end up burnt and red. "Honey, come quick," my mother sobbed as she reached us. She tucked a wild strand of hair behind her pointed ears. "It's the cows." My father's brown eyes widened. The cows were sick, or worse. Every year we lost more and more animals to illness or starvation. We headed toward the barn where we kept what was left of our small herd. The icy chill of the morning air beat across my face. Winter would come soon, and if the cows didn't survive, neither would we. As it was, we barely got enough milk from the cows to meet the needs of our village. If we lost any more of them, there wouldn't be enough for everyone. Over the past couple years, a handful of people from our village died from starvation. Most of the families in Addersfield were farmers, and because of that, we were all expected to feed ourselves. Unfortunately, every new harvest season was worse than the last. People had to ration their food, but even that wasn't always enough. The lands of Altera were dying, and without aid from the Dark Nation, everyone in Addersfield would eventually starve to death. When we reached the barn, I had to stifle back tears. 2 of our older cows were dead, their blood staining the floor of the barn. The rest of the herd had lain down. They were all too thin. The grain we harvested was hardly enough to keep them alive. "How long have they been dead?" my father asked. "They were warm when I found them, so sometime this morning. I cut them open to start the bleeding, but knew I'd need more hands to get this done," my mother replied. She pushed on the rear legs of one of the dead cows, and more blood oozed out of it. My father did the same to the other dead cow. I fought back the urge to vomit. There was too much blood. "We're running low on salvia. Why don't you see if you can't get more from town?" my mother said. She knew I couldn't bear the butchering process. "But there's too much work to be done here," I replied. My stomach churned at the thought of helping them cut up the cows, but I knew I needed to help. "Nonsense," my father replied. "Your mother and I can take care of things here, but we're going to need more salvia if we hope to keep the rest of the herd alive." I looked to the cows that were lying in the barn. Foot rot had spread to all of them over the past week. Salvia was the only herb we had access to that could fight the infection. If we ran out of it, they would surely die. All right, I'll go to town to get more. Be careful out there, Dad said. Dad said as he waved me off. I went to the house to grab my pack. We lived in a small wooden cabin that only had 2 rooms. We had a main room and a bedroom with 3 cots in it. My pack sat beside my cot. I grabbed it and headed toward town. With any luck, the alchemist would have salvia, and I'd be home with it before sunset. The town was a few miles north of our farm, and it usually took me about 2 hours to get there if I walked. Even though I moved with urgency, the time passed slowly. When the town was finally in sight, I took a moment to catch my breath and looked back at the lands behind me. Our town was located at the top of a hill, so it had a beautiful view of the farmlands below. It pained me to see that a large portion of the land was barren. Fields of black nothingness covered more of the land than the fields of green. My heart ached to see how the earth suffered. I prayed the gods may give us a way to save our land. People filled the town square. There was a live broadcast at the viewing station, which would make it impossible for me to wade through the crowd. I decided it would be easier to cut through the alleys to get to the alchemist shop. There were only a couple shops between me and my destination when I was stopped. Now where's a fine lass like you going in such a hurry? The man slurred his words as he stepped out in front of me. I have urgent business with the alchemist, so if you'll excuse me. My attempt to slip past the man failed. He caught my wrist and pinned me to the alley wall. I could taste the liquor on his breath as the smell suffocated me. Surely he'll understand if you're a wee bit late. He ran his fingers through my hair as he spoke. His dark brown eyes stared down at me. I could see pain reflected in them as he looked through me. He did not see me as a person, but as a mere outlet for his unfortunate circumstances. I felt bad for him briefly until the gravity of the situation hit me. This man was lost, and I doubted there was anything I could say to stop him from what he was about to do. He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned away. I rammed my knee into his groin, and he took a step back. It was my chance to run, so I took it. Unfortunately, he was only surprised for a second before he grabbed a fistful of my hair and threw me to the ground. My body still ached from the duel with my father, and the man was 3 times my size. I knew I wouldn't be able to fight him off. My heart raced in my chest as I prayed for an escape. Ahem, a man's voice echoed down the alley. My attacker turned to look up at him, but his head blocked my view. Excuse me, sir, but that's my woman you have there, so unless you want me to retaliate, I suggest you leave. I see. I'll be leaving then. The man's weight quickly lifted from me, and he ran off down the alley. My head throbbed as I looked up at the man who'd saved me. Nodin? I gasped as I recognized him. His skin was tanned from the summer sun, and his black hair had been cut short, revealing his perfectly pointed ears. He extended his hand toward me, and I graciously took it. Are you hurt? He asked, as he looked me over for injuries with his dark teal eyes. I'd known Nodin for years. We met at the alchemist shop. He was apprenticing there for the first time I walked in. He had been protective back then, too, warning me about the more dangerous herbs. I threw my arms around him, squeezing tightly. I'm fine, thanks to you, but it was risky for you to challenge that man like that. You could have been hurt. He was clearly drunk and no threat to me. Nodin held me at arm's length. You should be more careful. And you shouldn't put yourself in danger for me, I replied, moving out of his grip. He smiled and shook his head. His gold earring glimmered in the sunlight as it hung from his ear. It drew my attention, and I couldn't help but admire how Nodin's long, pointed ears complemented his sharp jawline. He was lucky to be in a sud. Why were you in an alleyway anyway? You know it's best for women to stick to the main streets. There was a broadcast on the viewing station, and I was in a hurry, I replied. A lot of good that did you. Were you headed to see the alchemist? Yes, I need to get salvia for the cows. All right, I'll accompany you the rest of the way, he said as he motioned for me to lead. I didn't want to be a burden, but I let him escort me anyway. My hands still trembled from the attack, and it was easier to go along with him than it was to fight. Once Nodin made his mind up about something, it was impossible to change it. When we got to the alchemist shop, it was mostly empty. The walls were lined with shelves that held glass jars full of different herbs and potions. I checked the shelves for salvia while Nodden went to the back to look for the alchemist. As I scanned the shelves, the bell to the shop door rang behind me. I turned and glanced at the man who walked in. His pointed ears pegged him as an Asud, and he was dressed in an all-black military uniform. Based on the decorations around his collar, I guessed he was a sergeant for the Dark Nation Army. His beady eyes locked on mine as I stared. Soldiers rarely visited Addersfield. You there. Where's the owner of this establishment? He spoke to me in a sudden, even though I was clearly human. Before I was able to reply, the alchemist stepped out of the back room. Hello, sir. How may I help you today? The alchemist smiled as he greeted the soldier. He was completely unfazed by the military presence. His long black hair was braided to one side and had specks of gray throughout it. He was by far the wisest Asud in town. Let's get out of here, Nodden whispered as he nudged me toward the door. The soldier spoke to the alchemist, but I could not hear what was said. I was hurried out of the shop before I could protest. What was that for? I asked as the door closed behind us. I still need to get salvia for my family. He doesn't have any, Nodden replied. He led me around the corner of the building so others wouldn't overhear us. His eyes scanned the town the whole way. Then I'll have to search the woods, I said. My family needed the salvia, and time was of the essence. I knew of a grove in the forest not too far from town where salvia liked to grow. It can wait until the morning, Nodden said. You shouldn't wander the woods at night. I looked to the sky. The sun was still high. It's nearly midday. I'm sure I could make it home by nightfall if I leave now. Nodden's dark teal eyes stared into mine. It's not safe, not with these soldiers around. Why are they here? I asked, looking around the corner of the building. I'm not sure, but it can't be good. A crowd was gathered around the viewing station, with a handful of soldiers lined up outside the town hall. If the Dark Nation sent soldiers, then something big was about to happen. But was their presence a threat? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that our cows were sick and that salvia could help them. I need to get going. I headed around the back side of the shop and Nodden followed. I'll walk you home, he replied. His words were full of confidence, as if saying them made them true. I'm not going home, not until I get salvia for the cows. Nodden sighed and stopped in his tracks. I continued to walk on past him. Tyler, Nodden said sternly, and I turned to face him. His lips formed a thin line and his eyes stared into mine. A chill ran down my spine. The cows need the salvia, I said through quivering lips. My heart raced. I had only ever seen that look on Nodden's face once before. If I didn't comply with what he wanted, he would use his magic to make me. I could already feel the cold prickle of ice on my skin. Your safety is more important, he replied. His dark teal eyes didn't back down. All right, fine, I said as the chill overwhelmed me. I'll go home. Good. The cold prickle of ice vanished. I was powerless against magic and hated that there was nothing I could do about it. Nodden was usually so kind to me, but when it came to my safety, he went too far. I knew he was just trying to look out for me, but I wasn't always in need of protection. Our journey began with silence. We walked slowly back toward my family's farm, and even though Nodden wouldn't let me get the salvia our cows needed, I refused to let it get me down. I reveled in the cool breezes that tossed my hair about, taking in deep breaths in the fresh air. It reminded me that the earth was still alive, which meant it could still be saved. I only hoped we would be able to find a way to save it before it was too late. How has the harvest been this year? Nodden asked, breaking the long silence that hung between us. He stared out at the fields of nothingness. Worse than last year, I'm afraid. My sigh was audible. That doesn't bode well for Addersfield. Your farm has been the main source of food these past couple years. The other farms hardly produce at all anymore. I know, we're doing the best we can. Father has been rationing the family supply in order to give more to the town. He feels responsible for the families that died last winter. What? Nodden stopped and turned toward me. Is he really that foolish? If he cuts into your family's supply, he puts you at risk for starvation. There was tension in his voice. He sounded much wiser than his years when he spoke out of concern for me. It made me think he was older than he appeared. Asuds could be tricky that way. You know how my father is. He wants to save as many people as possible, and I fully support him. I'd rather be a little hungry than watch another person die. Don't be a martyr. Your life is too important. He sighed and began to walk again. Being kind to our neighbors does not make us martyrs. It's simply the right thing to do, I said. Nodden had no family, so he only ever had to worry about himself. He didn't understand what it was like to feel responsible for others. Kindness isn't right if it gets you killed, he replied. We continued the rest of our walk in silence. Nodin hated it when things didn't go his way. The sun bathed the land in an orange glow as it began its descent. We reached the farm before dark. Smoke rose from our cabin's chimney, carrying the mouth-watering smell of beef stew with it. Dinner was almost ready. Nodin stopped a few meters away from the cabin's door. I'll meet you here tomorrow morning. We'll get the salvia then. You should join us for dinner, I replied. No. Good night. I'll be back tomorrow. His words were short. Before I could think of a reply, Nodin turned and walked away. He traveled back toward town. It would be dark before he made it home. I prayed for his safe return as he disappeared in the distance. Even though he was out of sight, I continued to stare in his direction. He had put himself in danger for me. Again. And that is the end of chapter 3. And that was Tyler's perspective. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Chapter 3. So, yeah. A lot going on already. 3 chapters in. And obviously, Tyler's in a completely different part of the world than the boys are. So, you can kind of see that in that chapter. It's, guys, super excited for this. And yeah, so that was chapter 3. And tomorrow, I will be back to read chapter 4, and that's going to be at 3 p.m. So, tomorrow at 3 p.m. is going to be our next book tour event. You guys are doing it. Stick around, follow along. Everything is linked below. If you guys have questions, you can feel free to drop them in the chat, drop them in the comments, and I will see them and I will answer them in the future at the future events. So yeah, that is it. That's it. That's all I have for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed listening to me read from my own book, which is like oddly challenging, I feel like, to like read your own writing out loud. I don't know. It's a weird thing. It's a weird thing, I feel like. But yeah, and what haven't I mentioned? Also, if you guys are looking to get involved in any writing communities, if you guys need help writing or making writing friends, I am part of 2 Discords. One is for dark authors, so dark fiction authors, but really anyone can join that if you're writing. But it is a dark authors Discord, and then there's a NaNoWriMo dedicated server, and I know we're like in the middle of Camp Nano right now, so like you can join in on those. There are links to those Discords below if you want to chat, ask me questions. That is probably the best place to hit me up. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I am excited to have you guys. Thanks for being here, Diane. Thanks for being here. So hopefully I'll see you guys tomorrow. And for anyone who doesn't know, I actually do weekly write-ins on Monday mornings. So I will actually have a live write-in tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you can come work with me then. And then my next live reading is going to be tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So yeah, that is what's going on. Get excited. The reckoning is almost here. I can't believe it. Thank you guys for chatting. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.